So I've finally come to the end of my draft grades for each division for the 2016 NFL Draft. Yippee, skippy! Let's fire through the NFC West. What do we got out of these four teams? Two teams that are in a championship contending window right now with the Seattle Seahawks, the Arizona Cardinals. Another organization that would seem to be a dysfunctional mess in the San Francisco 49ers that decided, hey, let's bring in potentially even more dysfunction while still having massive questions at the quarterback position with the hiring of Chip Kelly. And then you've got a Rams organization moving from St. Louis to Los Angeles, looking to establish a new foothold in the second biggest media market and population base in the country. A team that has been toiling in mediocrity the last several years and needs something to help them get over that hump. So, how did these teams do? Did these teams help or hurt themselves? Well, you can look at every pick of these teams in the description box down below, along with my thoughts on the best and worst pick and their overall grading. I'm going to talk about the general thoughts of each of these teams a little bit. Now, let's start worst to first. And I do have to go worst being the Los Angeles Rams. There's a part of me that wants to sit there and say it was the Arizona Cardinals, but I'll touch on them soon enough. With the Los Angeles Rams, this is a team that desperately, badly needed help at the quarterback position. And where they were sitting at the 15th overall pick in this draft, for all intents and purposes, you probably had the feeling, especially as the draft process continued even before the big move up, that both Goff and Wentz were going to be long gone off the board by the time the Rams would be picking at 15. Was 15 going to be too rich for the Paxton Lynch sweepstakes? Was 15 not going to be the place where they could address quarterback? Would they then, as a result, have to go into another year where they're talking about Case Keenum and or Nick Foles battling it out for the starting quarterback position? Is that really the type of impression you want to make in your return to Los Angeles after over 2 decades in St. Louis? Probably not. So maybe it shouldn't be that surprising that the Rams went all in and made the big move up the board that they did from 15 to go to number 1 to make sure at the end of the day they got their guy. Now, they got their guy, apparently. Whether or not that was the right decision remains to be seen. Look, I'm fine with Jared Goff. I think Jared Goff does indeed have franchise quarterback potential. I think between him and Wentz, I think he is, in theory, the safer pick. But if I'm taking a quarterback number 1 overall, I don't necessarily know if I want to get the safest pick. I want to get the best possible talent. And to me, the best possible talent in this draft is Carson Wentz. So you look at this trade up from several different standpoints for the Rams. Trading up big for quarterbacks traditionally doesn't work. It really doesn't, especially when you look at what you have to give up potentially to go get those guys. You put those guys in a bad situation early on in their career from Jump Street. That's not the position to be in. Now, granted, the Rams have Todd Gurley. That helps. But there's still questions on that offensive line. And outside of Tavon Austin, they really have nothing at the wide receiver position, nothing at the tight end position. And you're bringing a young quarterback in like Goff. You've traded up to number 1 overall to get him. You're going to have to start him right away, and you're not putting him in a very good situation. You really aren't. So I question the philosophy of trading up. Is this still a Rams team with plenty of holes on both sides of the roster? You gave up a lot of draft pick currency this year and next year to go up from 15 to 1 to go get a guy. And I don't know if you look at Jared Goff and you feel like he's a slam dunk, can't miss franchise guy. And he most certainly isn't the same level of talent that Mariota and Winston were last year, in my opinion. If you were making this big move up the board to get one of those 2 guys last year, then I applaud you for it, because at the end of the day, I feel like it would have been justified. I feel pretty safe that both of those guys become long-term franchise quarterbacks at the NFL level. Jared Goff, I don't know. So that's a big move up the board to get a guy like this, all the while, in my opinion, a big move up the board to get the wrong guy. If I'm making this big move up, I'm gambling on the guy with better size, better natural arm strength, and better overall athletic ability. Now, that's not to totally dismiss Jared Goff, because I think he has incredible accuracy, but sometimes his decision-making is lacking. I just wonder what his upside is. Carson Wentz, to me, has a much higher upside. So I question not just the philosophy of trading up for a quarterback, but then trading up for a quarterback and the quarterback that they did take. Furthermore, I start to wonder, maybe they would have just been better off staying put at 15 and just taking Paxton Lynch. Yes, it would have been a reach at that point in time, but is it necessarily a massive reach? No. Furthermore, you look at the picks that you would have been able to keep for this year's draft and next year's draft, maybe Paxton Lynch is a step or 2 below Wentz and Goff in terms of talent and NFL readiness. And I agree with that assessment. But imagine if you've got that second, that 3rd round pick. You know, in the Rams case, you had 2 second-round picks and a 3rd round pick. You could take those picks and invest those semi-premium picks into talent on the offensive side of the ball. Would you rather have Goff or Wentz with not much around him, or would you rather have Paxton Lynch with possibly quite a bit more around him? I might take the Paxton Lynch with quite a bit more around him approach. So I just really wonder about this. Now, with the Rams giving up what they did to make the big move up, there wasn't going to be a lot left, but they had 5 picks on day number 3, and I thought they did a decent job. Higbee and Cooper in round 4, you needed to get help for Jared Goff. And I felt like they got a future starting tight end in Tyler Higbee. They got a contributing wide receiver in Pharoh Cooper. I love the pick in round 6 of Michael Thomas out of Southern Miss. I think he could be one of the big steals of this draft. So the Rams, with some of the remaining picks that they had on day number 3, did pretty well. You know, in some ways you might sit there and say occasionally they passed upon superior players to take guys on the offensive side of the ball, and that's not exactly an untrue assessment. But I liked what they did. It's just I'm not sure about the trade up for Jared Goff. Ultimately, if he pans out, this will be an A-plus draft. If he doesn't pan out, this will be an F draft no matter what. So right now I kind of broke the difference and gave him a C-. If they would have traded up and taken Carson Wentz, it's probably a C+. But only time will tell. The Arizona Cardinals, in terms of their draft, you know, this is a team that is really close. I don't know if they'll ever get there, but they could potentially get there. And it's a draft like this where maybe you could find 2 guys that could come in and make a difference, and that's what you need. Now, I'll look at Nkemdiche in round 1. To me, Nkemdiche is a reach in round number 1, just strictly from an on-the-field standpoint. I think this was a guy that, yes, you could see the athletic upside is tremendous, but his effort level is inconsistent. He's not a natural pass rusher. And far too often he gets penetration in the backfield and doesn't make plays. He doesn't make enough plays to me to have been considered the first and in particular high first-round talent that so many people had him for so long during the draft process. And then when you look at all the off-the-field concerns, you know, getting arrested for this and getting into trouble for that and doing this and doing that and the influences around him and the people he chooses to surround himself with, you know, first-round pick on a guy like that seems to be a steep, steep investment to me. Now, that's not to say he can't come into the NFL and grow and mature as a man, because he's all of, 21 years of age. And I think about myself at 35 now, and I look back at the man I was at 21, and they are entirely different people. So that's not to say that a Robert Nkemdiche can't figure it out, but I'm concerned about it, especially with his brother Denzel being around him and other influences. If he can't remove himself from those influences, and family influences and negative family influences are always the hardest and most difficult to separate yourselves from, we could be looking at a guy who can't get himself right, can't stay on the field because he's getting suspended or getting himself into trouble. But he also could come in and figure it out, and he could get coached up, and he could be a real solid contributor for them. The rest of this draft, though, you just look at it and you say it's not that impressive. Now, you do have to factor in that they gave up a second-round pick in order to get Chandler Jones. Now, that's a deal you do to me 100 out of 100 times. You needed to upgrade your pass rush. No second-round pick in this draft, you would assume at this moment in time, will be as productive as Chandler Jones has been. You have to go off of that philosophy. Chandler Jones is a guy in his mid-20s, so he hasn't even reached, in theory, the peak of his career. He's just starting to enter his peak. You know, when you factor that into the draft grading here, it's Nkemdiche in round 1 and then Chandler Jones in round 2, basically. That's not a terrible draft. But you look, there were several reaches to me. Brandon Williams was a reach. Marquis Christian was a reach. Cole Toner was a reach. I would argue maybe even Evan Bain was a bit of a reach. Just several reaches, several examples of situations where I thought they could have gotten better players on the board. I gave them a C grade, but a lot of that, honestly, is the strength of the grade that I give them for trading a second-round pick of Jonathan Cooper to get Chandler Jones, frankly. Because in terms of the actual performance within the picks of the draft, I really didn't like what they did. You look at the San Francisco 49ers, you know, and I was wondering how it was going to work out with Chip Kelly and Trent Baalke and everything else and what the philosophy was going to be. Now, early on in the process, you know, the quarterback decision was taken out of their hands because with the trades up by both the Philadelphia Eagles and the Los Angeles Rams, you know by the time you get to 7 that the 49ers aren't going to be able to address quarterback. And, you know, it's unfortunate for them, but maybe it's not the worst thing for them because maybe this isn't the year to address quarterback. Maybe this is the year to build up other areas of your roster. Because, frankly, this is a roster that ended up devoid of talent with retirements and free agency departures and a few years of pretty poor drafting. You know, you had needs all over the place on both sides of the ball, pretty much in every single area. So for the 49ers, the approach of going in here and just trying to find good football players, to me, was as important as anything else. And I got to say, I don't think the 49ers were terrible here. I love the pick of DeForest Buckner for them at number 7. Love, love, love. You want to talk about running that 3-4 defense. Now you got a pair of bookends in that 3-4 at the defensive end position. And last year's first-round pick, Eric Armstead, and this year's first-round pick, who is even a better player already in DeForest Buckner. That's a potent combination to have to deal with for the future. Two guys that Chip Kelly's familiar with, two guys that are familiar with Chip Kelly. They make a lot of sense. And DeForest Buckner made such a world of sense here for me. He really did. The quarterbacks are gone. You could have maybe went with Laremy Tunsil here, but DeForest Buckner is much cleaner off the field. He doesn't have those same type of questions that Laremy Tunsil did. This had to be the pick. This was a slam dunk, like A-plus pick for the 49ers. I know a lot of people want to crap on them for trading up into round 1 to get a guard, but the fact is I had Garnett as the #1 guard in this draft class. I had him as a top 26 or so talent. So it wasn't a reach where they got him. And at the end of the day, he had to learn his lesson from Philadelphia, where they didn't do a good enough job of addressing the trenches on both sides of the ball. And the play of the team really suffered as a result. You needed to beef up the trenches on both sides of the ball for the San Francisco 49ers. Learn from those mistakes of the past. Don't be doomed to repeat your history. Joshua Garnett is going to be a solid starter inside at guard. You could do a lot worse. And it's not like they gave up a ton to move up. I know a lot of people question it or criticize it. I don't think they should, frankly. I really, really don't. Because you got 2 day-1 starters here, one on the defensive line, one on the offensive line. That has to help improve your football team a little bit. I like some of what they did in terms of the middle of the draft. At the defensive back position, Will Redmond in round 3, coming off of his knee injury. This is a guy that can play. Rashard Robinson, the 4th round out of LSU. Here's a guy that couldn't stay out of trouble at LSU, but 4th round, you can gamble on that type of stuff because he has that size, that body of work in terms of his physical tools to suggest he could be a press man corner with some size that the 49ers really honestly desperately needed. I thought this draft was solid for them. It was a C-plus draft. I don't think it was spectacular. I was a little surprised that they waited until round 6 to get a wide receiver. I thought that was a more pressing need. But when you look at the way the draft kind of played out, it'd be, I think, a lot different if they traded up to 28 where they did, where Kansas City was picking. If one of those receivers in Doxson, Fuller, or Treadwell were available, I think people would look at this draft a lot better for the 49ers, but those guys weren't there. So they didn't take them. I was surprised they didn't address tight end at all. I was surprised they waited until round 6 to address the running back position, but I thought they did okay with Kelvin Taylor. It was a C-plus draft. And, I don't think this is a big-time organization changer, but I think they got some help out of this draft, in particular with the first 3 picks. I really do. I think the big winners in this division were the Seattle Seahawks. I liked a lot of what they did. I understood the philosophy. Ifedi, I thought, was a reach at the end of round 1, yes, but I think he comes in and he starts right away at guard for the Seahawks, and he made sense for them. I love Jarran Reed in round number 2, the fact that they got a guy that I could have made a very strong defense for them taking at pick 31 in round 1. They got a pick 49 in round 2. I mean, this is a situation where they could have just taken Jarran Reed at 31 and then gambled Ifedi would be there at 49, knowing he probably wouldn't have been. Or they could sit there and take Ifedi in round 1, knowing sometimes how the draft plays out, you have to do this. And you gamble and hope that a Reed falls to you. And the Seahawks are originally at like 56. They trade up to 49 where the Bears were, and they go get the guys. So they come out of this draft with both of them. And then you look at round 3, CJ Prosise, I think, is a starting running back at the NFL level. Nick Vannett is a tight end that allows you to deploy Jimmy Graham as anything other than an inline blocker, which is the last thing they need to do. A nice role-playing type of guy. I thought they got help even on day 3 in the draft, and guys like Quinton Jefferson and Alex Collins, and maybe even a guy like a Kenny Lawler. This, to me, was a draft where you could see the identity of the Seattle Seahawks on both sides of the ball and who they like to be. This was a draft where I thought they got some good value. I thought they got some sensible players. It might not be overwhelming to you in terms of star potential and pop in big names, but these are the type of drafts that championship contending teams want to have. These are the type of drafts that help keep championship contending teams. And that's why I felt the Seattle Seahawks were one of the 5 best performers in the 2016 NFL draft. And I thought they were pretty much the runaway winners here in terms of the performance in the NFC West.